Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Do we have everyone? How many people? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, we don't have everybody yet, but I'll get started with the with an introduction. If you weren't able to make it to the introduction session, my name is Mark Adamcin, and I am a principal architect at Bounteous. And I've been doing development on Oakpal for the last couple of years, and hopefully today you'll have a good opportunity to get your hands dirty with it, and we'll see how far we get. So let's still have people coming in. I think you might be expecting a couple more. In the meantime, I have sent out an email to everyone with a link to the materials. I've also posted that link in the conversations section here on the left, the conversations tab. So if you haven't had an opportunity to install Maven or Docker, you can take that opportunity now. Docker will come into play towards the end of the session, most likely. So it's going to be mostly Maven. And if you haven't cloned the interactive materials repo, please do that as well. Maybe one more. Let's see what I got here. I guess maybe we're missing just one. All right, well, let's get started. The plan for the workshop is my hope is it'll be as interactive as possible. We only have max 10 participants, so feel free to turn on your microphone or ask any questions at any time. I've written the exercises to be as verbose as I could manage, and so hopefully if we skip things, you'll be able to return to the materials at any time at your leisure and continue with the activities. So if you miss details, you can hopefully catch up pretty quickly. So a little introduction then, again, for people just joining. Mark Adamcin is my name. I work for Bounteous as a principal architect. I've done and continue to do a lot of AEM implementations for Adobe customers, and currently been focused on migrating customers to AEM as a cloud service. And Oakpal has been sort of a passion project for me that was born out of difficulties with different customers having wildly different deployment methodologies that created weird issues in production and UAT environments when dealing with multiple teams developing in parallel. So at sometimes you might think that there's a lot of complexity here, and it might feel over-engineered, but I promise that it was born out of real pain. And so it's hopefully something that you might find valuable for yourself as well. If you're doing development on Adobe as a cloud service, obviously I think it's probably simplifying a lot of the variables that go into building and deploying AEM applications. But there are still many use cases that Oakpal will be hopefully a good tool, if not the best tool for solving. So let's see, how do we get a confirmation? Is everybody ready to begin? Is anybody not ready to begin who has not cloned the repository, is not
just action, a question, just an action, a question mark.
Okay.
Where should we ask our questions? Should we use the chat? Should we use the question and answers? Or should we just use the audio?
I think chat would be
okay.
Probably the best primary place. To get my attention immediately, I would say use your microphone judiciously.
Okay.
Within reason, but there are going to be times where I stop and I just would like discussion. Otherwise, this format lacks a lot of interactivity by default. So I'm happy to receive questions in the form of audio. All right, so the structure of the exercises here. There are 3 basic exercises where I've written them to be as like step by step as possible. There isn't any area for creativity or anything like that. So hopefully we can whip through those real quick. And then the 4th exercise is actually more of a quiz, like or a self-study kind of thing. And it has 3 requirements that you're given the opportunity to implement as Oakpal checks. And then you can validate your solutions against a Docker image that's on Docker Hub. And hopefully that will spark some discussion about the rationale for that. So let's begin with step 1 or exercise 1. So Oakpal is a tool that most people are going to primarily use with Maven. So let's learn how to use it with Maven. So the objectives for this exercise are adding the oakpal-maven-plugin to an existing multi-module Maven project, which is in your materials. It's the classic app folder. You're going to configure the plugin to initialize an Oak repository with the right AEM node types, privileges, and namespaces. And then you're going to be able to execute a simple scan of the all content package artifact that includes all of its embedded packages in the scope of its scan. So the upshot of that is, like, for example, with Cloud Manager, with AEM as a cloud service, right? You build a single quote all package that contains everything that's deployable to your environments. So we're going to reproduce that here. This project was built from the latest Maven archetype for AEM. And so it has an all package that's exactly the same as if you were to create your own project. So let's just dive right in. So first off, we're going to build a classic app. I've already CD'd into classic app myself, but let's just go ahead and do Maven clean install. And by the way, I've got the conversation open on the left here. So if you have questions, I should be able to see them. Otherwise, yeah, shout them out. Okay, so Going. I should have gone and figured out how to turn off the analyze classes bit. That's gonna get rid of a lot of log space. All right, so expecting a successful build result. Does everybody have a successful build result? If you are unable to get the dependencies that this build relies on, then you might have some networking issues that we might want to take a moment to work out. Otherwise, all green, moving on. Okay, so next we're going to create a property in our classic app parent POM to manage our oakpal version for us. So we're going to specify our oakpal version number right at the bottom of our property section up here. Open. Cool. While I'm got it open, let's just do that. All right. Then we're going to add a plugin to the plugin management section to specify our oakpal plugin in the same POM. So let's go find our plugin management. Let's just go ahead and plop it right here. All right. So what this is doing is it's just establishing the version and adding a default execution for the scan so that we don't have to repeat that execution in every time that we use it. All right, so then next we're going to open our all content package, and this is going to be where we're doing the vast majority of our work. Open up the all POM, and it wants us to add this after FileVault package Maven plugin, which happens to be right here. It's this big one. All right, we don't have to specify the version because we're inheriting it. All right, so now let's run it again. I have a step in here that describes how to run this without rebuilding everything. We will learn how to do that sooner rather than later. Yeah. So in the meantime, Oakpal creates a fresh oak repository every time it runs a scan. So it can take time by itself, especially depending on the number of checks that you're running. It's sometimes it will feel like you're waiting more than you should have to. But are we all successful? Please let me know if you're not successful at this point. To confirm, obviously we ran through a bunch of modules. So if you're not sure that your execution actually ran, you can check to see that the report was written to the target folder of your all package module. So should have an oakpal-plugin reports. And so if we cat that, you can see the same output we have here. So it did run that. So next, it's not telling us much, and I would have actually expected much to fail, except for the fact that what we're doing, all we're doing right now is actually installing the all package without recursion, because we haven't told Oakpal to listen for the Sling JCR installer type of events. So we're going to add that now. Let's go ahead and take this configuration, plug it into our POM. And then run it again. But this time I'm going to cheat, and we're going to let's specify, I believe it is, is it just, it's classic app.all. So I'm just specifying a single module to rebuild, because all I've done is, it's the last module basically in the chain, and that's where we're going to be making most of our POM changes. If we have to rebuild the project, if you really feel you need to, we can always do that, but this should speed up our activities a bit. So that is Maven clean install, and then you use -pl, and then : the artifact ID. Whoa. That's quite a bit of output, but it's all expected. So this is the kind of thing that happens when you haven't specified node types, because now you've tried to install a bunch of content with assumptions that it's being installed into an AEM application repository, but there's a lot of initial JCR repository details that haven't been established. And so you see this kind of failure, and it's a cascading failure where children fail to install because of parents not installing and so on. So next, we're going to fix that, or at least start fixing it. So let's go and add this to our parent, because we can inherit this kind of configuration. What we want to do is provide those node types to start with, and then we'll add more as needed. So I'm going to come here to the parent, and I'm going to add a configuration that specifies to look for Sling node type headers in the plugin dependencies. And then we add the dependency for NetCentric's AEM node types artifact that has aem.cnd in it. Very convenient. All right, so then we run it again. Aha, all right, so still some errors, but different errors. And if we look up, or just look here, you can see we do have this error here, no such privilege CRX:replicate. All right, and this is another standard error to see on AEM projects with Oakpal, so let's go resolve that. I have not packaged all of these AEM dependencies with Oakpal out of the box for the very reason that I want it to stay as open source as possible. And a lot of these dependencies aren't necessarily licensed by Adobe. And so until that happens, I don't want to just jump in and make all this happen automatically. So let's go ahead and add the missing pieces here, which are the JCR namespaces and the JCR privileges elements to the configuration. Still working in the parent POM. And the reason is if you want to use Oakpal on a different module, you can run Oakpal on any of your content package modules to target them specifically or come up with different scenarios, that kind of thing. So things that are common to all of those scans should probably be defined in the parent. Voila, we have a successful build again with a recursive package installation. So terrific. This, at the very least, is what I would expect to see on all my customer projects. This essentially establishes that your package installs in a JCR package manager situation on an AEM-based repository. So if you satisfy these constraints, then you can, you are at least catching situations where the package would fail to install in AEM, even if it's passing the FileVault validation step for whatever reason. Okay. Any questions? Feel free to pop open your microphone if you do. Cool. Moving on. Exercise 2. Integrating Oakpal checklists. So one of the goals of Oakpal was to make it easy for developers to share their acceptance criteria to the wider AEM community. And so I created this checklist format that sort of bridges initial JCR state and configured check implementations. So putting those two things together, you can sort of assert things and then check those assertions. So how do we actually use them in our project? Well, we're going to use the basic checklist that comes with Oakpal as a good example. And then we're going to try a third-party checklist, which is coming from ACS AEM Commons. So there we go. Let's go back to our all POM. Where is it? This one? There we go. All right. So remember that we had added this check before. Now we're going to run the entire checklist instead of just the Sling JCR installer check. So let's give that a shot. Okay, so a couple of the checks that are used out of the box are AC handling, which checks the access control handling property of the package. One of the things that's possibly terribly destructive that comes right out of the box is the ability to set that to something like clear, and it'll presumably delete all the access control entries. certainly within the scope of the package filter. So it's included as sort of a sanity check to make sure that, if you really want to have a destructive AC handling mode, you can, but we're going to first tell you about it. So you can see the violations are written with 2 different severities. AC handling has the major severity, and then this other one, filter sets, has a minor one. I'll talk about filter sets in a second, but the place to go to identify what merge is complaining, or the AC handling check is complaining about, is back up here in the FileVault package Maven plugin. And where do we have it? Oh, it's not in this one, but it's probably in a different one. Oh, UI.apps and UI.content, and then, all right. So, and what I should have clarified, when we go through these first 3 exercises, we're going to assume that everything in our content packages is intended. So we're going to adjust our oakpal configurations to allow the build to succeed based on what's in these what's in the content packages, if that makes sense. Just it makes it easier to go through the oakpal stuff that way. So we're going to end up learning how to skip or otherwise deal with the violations. So actually, I'll just talk about filter sets. Filter sets is validating certain things about the filter, the workspace filter. Oakpal reports merge mode filter sets as minor violations because of my personal experience with customers, AEM customers who use uninstall as part of their package deployment process. So I don't have any problem with merge in general. It's not by itself a violation. I don't think so. The fact that it's minor makes it so that the build will generally pass with default settings for oakpal. It's going to report them so that you know about them, but it's not going to fail the build. But the cases where it can become something that you should resolve are when you are actually uninstalling a package as part of the deployment process, because when you uninstall, and by that it means to install the snapshot package that was created when you first installed it, it uses the same workspace filter, but then forces the import mode to be replaced. And so this is an assumption that will change on uninstall, and it can do incredibly weird things in that situation. So that's the whole reason for even reporting it in the first place. All right, moving on. Let's see. There, it's looking at things. Let's talk about how to resolve the violations. So there are basically 3 approaches to resolving violations. The first one is to change the content package in some way to satisfy the acceptance criteria. This is the preferred way when you are actively developing on a project and you had oakpal established for quite some time. Generally, this means that as a developer, you've done something wrong, and oakpal caught it for you. But in our case, we're going to look at the next 2 options for resolving. Second option is to configure the check so that its acceptance criteria is more closely tailored to your project requirements. This is probably more preferred than the last one, but obviously it'll take a little bit more time to investigate what the check is looking for and how to configure it. And then the third way to resolve it is just to simply skip the check altogether. So let's try that. So to skip a check, you can come to your check configuration in the POM, and simply add an override for the check here. So in this case, I'm going to drop in this part. So as you saw, we had the report specifying that basic AC handling was causing our build to fail. So we're going to specify it this way. Now you can specify it as like just AC handling, because in this case it will match. It matches on the slashes. So there's an oakpal module, which in this case is oakpal core, and then you have the checklist that it belongs to, which is basic, and then the check name. So you can be more or less specific in this situation. There's really a little bit of flexibility there. I'm not sure how valuable it is, but in this case, what we're doing is we're actually identifying that check, and we're overriding this particular attribute of it, the skip, to make it skipped. So now we're going to run this again and see what happens. You're right, the build has succeeded. So you can still see the filter sets check has run, and it's still reporting the same violations as minor severity, and it has not failed to build. So we've satisfied that. Now, instead of skipping that check, let's instead try to configure it differently so that it's not as restrictive, and it won't fail to build. So instead of skipping it, we're going to drop in this config element. Because it is a configurable check, it accepts this level set property, which I've defined in the check. If you go to Adamcin.net/oakpal, go to where is it? Core, maybe? The basic checklist. And you can see the AC handling check here. Go to its documentation, Java doc is where I've got this right now. So we've got level set property, and it's mapped to an enumerator. So we'll go look at that. We've got no clear, no unsafe, only add and only ignore. And I believe the default right now is only add. But there's some that prevents you from like overwriting code managed ACLs in the future. So instead, changing it to no unsafe means that it'll let you merge in the ACEs that you've defined. So let's head on back over here. Let's see what happens now. So the hope is it still succeeds. Great, still succeeds. And you can confirm that it actually included the AC handling check in the report. So there it is. So AC handling check was included. Figured to accept the AC handling value of merge instead of merge preserve. All right, next, still driving through. Some checks are included as templates in the basic checklist. They are skipped by default. There are various reasons for this. Like an echo check, you want to define certain default parameters for it, but you don't want it to actually run by default. But if you skipped a check in your checklist, you can't unskip it in the POM. So instead, you have to address it as a template instead of by name. So we'll see what this looks like. You can look here at the basic checklist and see that I've identified those as that are skipped by default. So you see skip true, skip true, skip true, skip true. Echo is one of those. So what echo does, echo is very useless for general application, but sometimes if you are trying to determine what events are being fired because you just don't trust something, you can use echo to just basically spit out all the package installation events that oakpal supports. So it's very verbose. Hey, okay. Cool. So that's how to use that. If you didn't have that and instead just did this as name, basic echo, it wouldn't actually run it at all. All right. So the last bit of this exercise, we are going to integrate a third-party checklist. So this is going to involve a few steps. So first, let's see what we do. We need to add some dependencies. And we're going to specify an additional checklist. But here we go. I think we're going to do this in the parent POM. We are going to add the ACS Commons oakpal checks dependency here after AEM node types. And then we go back to our all package and add that checklist that I mentioned in the specs here. So if you were on Conrad's session earlier today about FileVault validation, he mentioned an example implemented in a different project for checking the content classifications, the API regions of AEM against your package. And we've had this implementation for oakpal. It basically works similar way. You have to export all the initial JCR state from AEM that has one of those mixins defined, and then package it up in this checklist, and then it just runs through the rules on your code to see if you are overriding or extending or shadowing any of those elements. So are we doing anything else? We don't need this guy here. So all I've done here is I've added the checklist and I've added the dependency to the plugin. So let's see if we fail. Cool. So we got those major violations as I described, but Also, remembering our strategy here is to just resolve these things in our oakpal configuration. So we're going to want to skip. And in this case, you can see I've been a little bit more specific here by specifying content class AEM65, which is the checklist, and then the content classifications check. And you can see that in the report is what is being executed. So now we'll have that skipped, and we should get back to a succeeding build. Now, what's interesting here is that I've skipped the check, but I've not skipped the initial state from the checklist. So you can see all the same activity here, that the checklist isn't installing node types and redefining them as expected. So only the check itself, only the violations were removed. Another thing to note is that for the checks, they have access to essentially a fully functional JCR session, but that session is write protected. So you can use all the methods, but if you try to make a write to the repository, it's going to throw an illegal state exception or something like that. All right. How do we reconfigure this one instead of skipping it? Well, if you go to the ACS AEM Commons implementation for it, you can look and see how it's handling the configuration. Basically, we're going to use the scope paths configuration here, which is also something you can see in the JSON of the checklist itself. We're going to override the scope paths configuration to exclude the paths that are violating in our situation. So let's grab config and replace skip. And cool. So that's that. And one more detail before we move on. I want to demonstrate that the config element in the POM for each check does support a pretty flexible syntax for providing the values for the configuration. Essentially, everything in oakpal is configured in JSON, and so the Maven plugin converts the Plexus configuration from provided by Maven into a JSON object model under the covers. And so I've also implemented this this converter to support JSON literals in many cases. You can override other things as well. But basically, if you go to your scope paths element here, ugh, what is so slow? And provide a hint equals JSON array, then provide essentially the same value as what you saw listed there, the scope has, but as a single element in this JSON array, you'll have the same effect. So it should still succeed. Kyle, is it understood that this plugin doesn't work when running Java 11, or is that just a me issue? Or to clarify, the my first check.js example. That's interesting. We're going to be moving there shortly, and I'll probably have you present, and we'll see. I am running all the unit tests for oakpal against Java 8, 11, and 14. But perhaps this is something that isn't captured in the unit tests. We'll see. There's also issues with, I've got to look forward to when Nashorn gets dropped from the JDK and all that. So I think that the scripting part may just not be captured with the CI. But let's go on. So at this point, you can remove the content class AEM65 checklists and the check and the dependency from classic app POM. Those are all done. Let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll be able to move on. In fact, I think you'd also say let's keep that, but let's follow the instructions. All right, writing your own checks. So this is where it gets fun, to see what's really possible and to make use of the progress check sort of event interface. So the objectives here is we're gonna try to get this to work, write our own check in 3 different languages. We're gonna start with a JavaScript check, and then we're gonna re-implement that in Java, and then we're gonna re-implement that in Groovy scripts. So let's get started. The basic structure of this is to implement the progress check interface. Just link to that. There are a number of events. Maybe I'll go through a few of them here. For one, you can ignore the get check name. It has a default implementation, but basically you're going to want to identify it so that you can address it with configurations at some point. But essentially, we identify packages with these, so you can identify a package or identify a sub-package. Now, this is oakpal calling this method. So it's telling the check, hey, I've identified a package, or I've identified a sub-package, and then there's an identify embedded package. The events call when you read a manifest, so it can provide the Java manifest type, let you know before extraction so that you can look at the repository state prior to installing the package, but also inspect the package properties or its meta-inf. One of the more important events here is imported path, and this is an overload that you're going to want to use. Basically, it provides the path that the JCR package manager has reported as being installed. It actually resolves the node that was installed or imported or no-op or whatever. And then path action here, it tells you if it was a no-op or an update or an add, essentially. You also get an event when a node was deleted. There's an event for immediately after extracting the package. And then more recent events are related to sling simulation. So when the scan initializes, it will provide some details related to sling simulation by passing the sling simulator type and then a set of the active run modes. Then more importantly, so you don't have to use that method, but if you care about, for example, when an OSGI configuration was detected for the particular run mode, then you can implement the before sling install event. Then we have the identify embedded package, which is when something is a package that was provided by sling JCR install. And then we have an event for checking the repository state after applying repo init scripts as OSGI configurations. And then finally, we have the after scan package event. And there are two other events: started scan and finish scan, but you don't get access to the repository. They're just bookends so that you can reset state. So that's that. Let's see about actually implementing this as a JavaScript check and keep things moving. We better just really grind away at it. So we're over halfway through now. All right. So first things first, create a new file under your folder, your new folder name, my first check. What I'm doing is in the all package, you want to create a myfirstcheck.js here. And you're putting it right under source test resources. And then in our POM, we're going to add that. And it looks like we've also removed our AC handling, which is great, and our checklist, which is great. So in fact, just replace that here. All right. Oh, if I do clean install. Whoops, what did I do? Configuration. That's in the all. Oh, all right. That again. Cool. And I think you can confirm that our check was actually registered here. Yep, myfirstcheck.js. All right, so Kyle, how far did you get when that failed? Feel free to use your mic. Oh, not working. Okay. So do I have JDK 11 here? I guess I could try. Can you tell me if you plugged in any values for it, like this one? So it says add this to your script. On that should fail because it's not actually JavaScript. Cool. So it says reference error print line is not defined in eval. I could try this with AKX v11. Work. Yep. I'm just guessing that was Java 11 that I set. Ah, that could be. All right. Kyle, can you confirm that was the error you received? All right. Yeah. So in this case, the JS extension is not registered as a JSR 223. So thank you for being the one to bring that fear that's been keeping me awake all these nights to my attention. So I will have to resolve that. So skip ahead to the Java. So basically, you know, it's a JVM, so you gotta, for JSR 223, you gotta put a script interpreter for JavaScript on the class path. I'll show you how that works in the Groovy section, because obviously Groovy is not supported out of the box. So we'll jump right through here. So I'll first switch back to my Java 8, and then I'm going to, there's a link to the example check for JavaScript, and you can then go there and copy the events that you need, uncomment them. And in our case, we're going to plug this in here. And then, did it also say to fix that? Yeah. So I want to fix that guy. And then I'm going to actually print inside of our imported path event. And this should show a bit more activity. So you can see all these paths being imported. All right, so moving on. Let's try to reduce the verbosity by simply, boom. Now we're going to do only look for a particular path. So now it shouldn't go on forever. And in this case, it's printing during execution. So you're going to see it actually print. And I didn't point this out before, but it prints that first statement, do I look like a JavaScript expert? It prints that prior to the creation of the repository. And then there is the imported a path method that gets called, and that's called prior to the report being printed. So that happens during the installation. Cool. Next, we want to actually report a violation instead of just printing. So got some description of the severities and their reasoning. Let's go ahead and follow the instructions here to replace our print message with an actual violation. And obviously it's not something that should be considered a violation, but you can see where we're going with this. So instead of having to deal with standard out as our interface for checking execution, we have this structured violation type. So here's our minor violation. Let's see, listed there in the check reports, organized under our check name, which is the actual script name by default. Okay. Next, a standard pattern to follow is to solve the challenge of not having all node state available. Like when the imported path method is called, when that event is fired, you don't necessarily have all the children, right? You don't have the full graph below that node, because those are all going to be represented by future imported path calls. So one thing that I find myself doing often is collecting paths that match a particular criteria during the imported path event, and then post-processing that at the end of the scan to determine any violations that need to be reported. So in this case, we're going to track our interesting path as whether it had been imported or not. And this will represent a cool, no failures. And as our exercise details, it shouldn't actually fail because we know our interesting path does get imported. So let's go ahead and make it fail and see what that looks like. And now our interesting path is going to not exist. And so our check should report the violation. Cool. So that's what we're looking at. All right, that's our first check. So let's do it in Java real fast. So the way that the oakpal scan goal works is it will look up any identified checks from the plugin class path or the Tesco class path for your content package project. So if we want to create a Java check, we're going to create it under source test Java so that it gets compiled. And then we'll reference it by the fully qualified class name. So my first Java check, let's do it. Come on. Check, and we're creating this under the oakpal package namespace. There you go. My first Java check. Cool. Quickly. Oh, well, is it maybe having a challenge because I didn't do the necessary instructions here to add the dependency? So in the parent, it wants me to add this to the end, the oakpal API. So we're going to define that here. Cool. And then I'm going to make it a test scope dependency in our all module. Let's just plug it right there. Okay. Cool. Re-import Maven. Resolve that dependency. Boom. Oh, everything's green. Okay. So we then need to update our oakpal check definitions. So instead of my first check.js, we're going to specify oakpal.myFirstJavaCheck. on that. Cool. So same violation, but a different check reporting it, right? My first Java check is now reporting the same issue. So let's go ahead and change that back. You can see, hopefully, the value of being able to just write these as unit tests for your content package module. That was really the driving goal here. It hasn't reached the maturity of the Maven Surefire plugin in terms of easy configuration, but maybe one day. Cool. So that's what that looks like. Let's now jump straight into the Groovy check. So what Kyle's already run into is a question of like, I really like writing in a particular language, but that's not provided by the JVM by default. So how do we make that available? Let's go ahead and add a dependency, and we're only going to put this one on the all package module. Won't bother governing it in the root. There we go. So this is a POM dependency that imports all the Groovy dependencies. So in this case, we're going to create a new file under resources because it's going to be interpreted, not compiled. If we wanted to compile Groovy into a check, then you would put that under source main Groovy or source main Java, however you configure the compilation. But that would also involve adding like additional plugins to the content package build, since it's not part of the lifecycle. So I didn't want to go that far, but here we go, file. All right. So I think what are we creating? My first Groovy check, Groovy. That, and in this case, we got I got to re-import Maven. So all of these are basically the same logic. They're just obviously structured in a different syntax for each usage. All right, cool. So we're all green here. So now we've got syntax checking in a script. That's cool. Kyle, are you able to actually do this now? Have you been successful with Java 11? Yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't have a fix for you for JS at the moment. You've given me a reason to go find a JS interpreter as a library, but I don't have one offhand. Oh, that should have failed. I forgot that step. So back to our oakpal-plugin. That's the wrong one. Right here. Of course, I forgot to change my impl. My first Groovy check.groovy. All right. So that's hopefully going to fail. And we're going to move. We've got 20 minutes left. So let's jump into writing your own, because I would like to have a chance to describe the Docker piece of this. we're not going to walk through how, like in detail, how to create the Docker image, but I'll show you the source for it and how that is ultimately used as the validator here. So I'll walk through these right now. So on to exercise 4, on your own. The goal here is to implement your own checks under classic app all source test Java or classic app all source test resources, and then validate that check logic against the output of the Adamcin Oakpal Exercise Solutions Docker image, which is currently hosted on Docker Hub, and I just built it just for this exercise. Before you begin, you want to reset your configuration to a clean state. You can leave the Groovy dependencies and all those dependencies if you want, obviously, because you might be interested in implementing it that way. But we're going to reset our plugin so that all we have is a Sling JCR installer check. All right, then let's read through these requirements. So I try to come up with some good, interesting, non-trivial challenges here. So the first one is to validate the component groups of all of your components. So on a CQ component node, you can define a component group property that in AEM will govern where it where you find it in the editor for a page in order to drag it into a container, for example. So in this case, what we want to do is make sure that all of our developers are following the correct conventions for deciding which component groups to use so that our authors are not confused. I've given more of a detailed description here. But basically, there are some rules. Write a progress check that enforces our desired component group model. Report any of the following as major violations. Any custom CQ component node that does not define a component group property, we want them all to declare a component group property. Any custom CQ component node under our form folder, under apps, classic app components form, whose component group is neither .hidden or AEM classic app form. So we want all those components under the form folder to be either a hidden component, as in not draggable into your page, or it needs to be in the form component group. That's why we have the form folder. And then finally, any other custom CQ component node under apps classic app components whose component group property is not one of hidden or structure or content or form. And I described those above. All right, requirement 2, if you get this far in the next 16 minutes. Client lives. So one of the problems that I've run into, especially with cloud service now, cloud service builds actually precompile your JavaScript, and so your client lives. And so if you've specified the GCC minifier, but pass in ES6 syntax to it, you will actually see the build fail before it even gets to AEM, and it's really annoying because that's basically all your logs will say is like, can't compile this JavaScript for miles and miles and miles. So let's catch that in the build so that we don't have to wait till it gets committed to Adobe Git. I've described an actual reason why this might suddenly appear. And there's also another case here that we want to ensure. So let's go through that. Write a progress check to guide our continuing migration. I've also described we're going from AEM 6.2 to AEM as a cloud service. So among other things, we have to add our client libs to /apps instead of /etc client libs, and we also have to specify allow proxy equals true if it hasn't been specified yet. So write a progress check to guide that continuing migration and prevent future regressions. Report any of the following as major violations. Any CQ client library folder under apps classic app client libs that doesn't specify a Boolean allow proxy property. And then any CQ client library folder under apps classic app client libs with a js.text child node that does not specify a JS process or multi-valued string property with a value of min:(none, which specifies no minifier should be used, or specifies min GCC with without specifying language in equals ECMAScript 6. And then finally, real quick, template policies. This is super bonus. I doubt this could even be done in 90 minutes without, with all the iterations that you'd probably have to go through. But basically, this is a demonstration of how you would validate linking between resources that are being installed. So in this case, our packages, our content package, for example, is defining some initial content for the repository in the merge scope filter routes, and that includes some templates and template types, as well as policies and the policy mappings for those templates and template types. So you want to write a progress check to help our developers identify when they've made a mistake in, like, say, copying or pasting the definitions for the templates in a way that breaks the mapping from the CQ policy to the component in the template. So write a progress check to help our developers identify when they have made mistakes before the authors get a chance to run into them. Report any of the following as minor violations. Any policy mapping node under templates policies, or under template types policies that do not specify a CQ: policy property, or whose CQ: policy property does not resolve to a policy definition under, well, that path. Also, identify any empty container component defined in the initial or structure pages of a template or template type whose map policy does not specify a component's property, i.e., you haven't provided any allowed components, so this container won't allow an author to actually drag anything into it. That's the upshot. Okay, any questions? No? All right. The last thing I'll mention is that there is a command, depending on the directory that you're in, you can run this command to run that Docker image I mentioned. Basically, this bit stays the same. This last argument here is the path to your classic app all package. So once you've built your package, you can then run this Docker command against that package and see what it identifies as the violations. And it has implemented these 3 requirements. Cool. This is on your own, so don't wait for me. I am available for questions and discussion. Let's let these 2 up. All right, thank you, everyone. That is the end of the session. So we'll stop the recording and let everybody continue on their own. Have a great evening.